Now let's talk about shame. Shame is what really keeps you stuck, and I want to walk you through exactly how this cycle works. Because this is where everything keeps repeating again and again, and until you see it clearly, you will keep falling into it. But first, it's really important to understand the difference between shame and guilt, because they are not the same, and this makes all the difference. Guilt is when you feel bad about what you did. You realize that I shouldn't have done that. It's about the action. And actually, guilt can help you change because it focused on fixing what happened. But shame is different. Shame makes it about you, not what you did, but who you are. Shame says, I'm a failure, I'm broken, and there's something wrong with me. And when you feel that, it doesn't help you move forward. It makes you want to hide. So here is exactly how the shame cycle happens. First, you watch porn, and right after that, your mind doesn't just say you make a mistake. It goes straight to making it about you. You start thinking, there's something wrong with me, I'm disgusting, I'm broken. And when you think like that, shame takes over completely. Then because you feel so bad about yourself, you avoid. You avoid thinking about what just happened. You avoid talking about it. You avoid praying because you feel too ashamed to face God. You avoid other people because you don't want anyone to know what you did. And most of all, you avoid yourself because sitting there alone with those thoughts and feelings is just too uncomfortable. But avoiding it doesn't make it go away, it only makes it worse because the shame and negativity start to build up inside. The longer you avoid, the heavier and more unbearable it feels, until eventually it gets to a point where you cannot take it anymore. At that point, you need relief, and the fastest way you know how to escape those painful feelings is to go right back to porn. Not because you deeply desire it, but because it helps you numb everything for a moment and get away from how bad you feel. But the relief doesn't last. Once it's over, shame hits again, and this time it's even heavier. Now it's not just I shouldn't have done that. Now it becomes I knew I couldn't stop. I knew I was hopeless. I'm a failure. And when you believe that, you completely give up. You say to yourself, what's the point now? I'm already messed up, so I might as well just keep going. And that's the cycle. You sleep and you watch porn. You feel deep shame. You avoid. The emotions build up. You go back to porn to escape. Shame hits harder after you give up, and the whole thing starts all over again. And this is exactly why quitting feels so impossible, because it's not just about stopping porn itself. It's about breaking this shame cycle that keeps pulling you back in every single time. So now you know shame is the most root cause of porn use. But did you ever ask, where does this shame actually come from? Where do those self-sabotaging thoughts come from? The true reason may shock you is because of what people tell you about porn. They say porn is cheating, betrayal, and an addiction. They tell you it causes erectile dysfunction, and that it damages your brain, that it destroys intimacy. And they keep repeating these things again and again, making it sound so dramatic, as if porn will ruin everything about your life and make you a terrible person. And all of this kind of message is actually exactly why you are stuck in the shame cycle. You try to quit, but you try to quit based on those wrong beliefs, and that makes it so hard because shame keeps pulling you back every single time. There are so many wrong claims and non-science based claims about porn, and I'll talk about them, all of them, in another video. But right now, just want to show you the 4 biggest myths, the ones that mainstream media and biased people keep pushing, which make you feel stuck in shame again and again. They thought saying these things would motivate you to quit, but actually it does the opposite. It makes you feel worse. It makes you feel more shame. It makes you hate yourself. And that's why you're stuck. Not because porn is so powerful, but because these false and non-science based claims that trap you in a mental prison. So the first wrong claim is, and this is the big one, the idea that porn use is addiction. You hear this everywhere, right? People say it all the time. But here's the thing you need to know. Porn addiction isn't an official diagnosis. No major medical organization lists porn addiction as a standalone disorder. Yes, the World Health Organization includes something called Compulsive Sexual Behavior Disorder, or CSBD, in its ICD-11 manual. And yes, it can include compulsive porn use, but even then they didn't label it as an addiction. CSBD might eventually be classified as a behavioral addiction, but right now the science does not fully support that label. Why? Because words matter. The term addiction can trap people in shame, create a fixed identity, and actually make it harder to change. That's why WHO took a more careful approach, recognizing the problem but without branding people as addicts. The more accurate and helpful term is problematic porn use, because it focuses on the behavior, not the identity. In reality, most people who struggle with porn don't need a medical label. They need support, tools, and a way out, not shame, not pathology. Same thing with the American Association of Sexuality Educators, Counselors, and Therapists, or ASECT. In 2016, they released a statement saying they don't see enough evidence to support calling sex addiction or porn addiction a mental health disorder. They also pointed out that a lot of the so-called treatments being offered are not really based on solid, accurate science. So right there, from the biggest experts in the world, porn addiction is not officially recognized. But still so many people believe in it. Why? Because of assumptions, because of shame, because of anxiety. A lot of people, especially those with strong moral, cultural, or religious beliefs, feel deep conflict about watching porn. And when you feel bad about something, it's easy to label it as addiction. For example, a study published by the APA, which was also covered in Business Insider, explained that many people who think they are addicted to porn are actually struggling with their own internal conflict. Nicole Pross, a PhD researcher, said it very clearly. If you think you are struggling with pornography, it is most likely that you are actually struggling with a conflict of your own personal values around your sexual behaviors and not really the porn itself. And this isn't just opinion. Another study by Perry and White had followed men over 6 years. They found that pornography use predicted depression, but only in men who disapprove of porn use. In other words, the ones who believed porn was bad were the ones who suffer emotionally. So what does that tell you? That doesn't mean your experience with porn and all the consequences and struggles that come with it are not real. It doesn't mean you making it up, and it doesn't mean you not hurting. You may still feel compulsive, you may feel stuck, and yes, you may in pain. That part is true and very real. But what's wrong here is the addiction label. Because once you start believing you addicted and begin telling yourself that you're powerless and that you cannot control it and that you're broken. And this is why addiction models don't really help when it comes to quitting porn. There's very little evidence showing that these methods actually work or help people stop in long term. So it's not your fault if you haven't been able to quit. It's not because you're weak or hopeless. It's because you have not been given the right approach. Like using a key from another door that simply doesn't fit, no matter how hard you try. And that's exactly why nothing changes. The next wrong claim is the idea that porn causes erectile dysfunction. And you hear this everywhere. They make it sound like watching porn will completely mess up your sexual performance. But the truth is, pornography by itself does not directly cause erectile dysfunction. We have plenty of research showing this. Some studies found no connection between how much porn someone watches and their erectile functioning. Yes, in some cases, with specific groups, there was a slightly negative link, but overall, the evidence says very clearly there's little to no association. For example, a study published in the Journal of Sexual Medicine in 2015 studied this and found little evidence connecting pornography use to male sexual health problems. They state that clearly that porn does not seem to be a significant risk factor for younger men's desire, erectile function, or orgasm. Another important study, also in the Journal of Sexual Medicine in 2019, confirmed this again. They found no causal link between pornography use and ED. The only place they saw an issue was in self-reported problematic use, which again ties back to shame and negative beliefs, not porn itself. That said, there are certain exceptions worth mentioning. If someone only struggles with depression, anxiety, or chronic stress, or if they feel guilt or moral conflict about using porn, that internal tension can start affecting sexual performance. And if porn becomes the primary source of arousal, especially with very specific types of stimulation, it's possible to get so conditioned to that format that real-life intimacy is flat or unresponsive by comparison. So what does that tell you? Porn can contribute to ED in vulnerable individuals, especially through psychological mechanisms like shame, anxiety, and conditioning. But for the average person, it's not a direct cause. Instead, overall health, mental state, and lifestyle play a much bigger role in erectile function. And this really matters because the number one psychological cause of erectile dysfunction across all age groups, even older men, has always been anxiety. If you are anxious about sex, nervous about your performance, or ashamed of your sexual behavior, that anxiety becomes the real problem, not porn. In fact, a very clear review done in 2021 by Valuraja and colleagues, published in the International Journal of Important Research, confirmed this. They found that men with anxiety disorders are at much higher risk of developing ED. And it's not just clinical anxiety either. Even regular shame and guilt can create the same issue. When you feel guilty for watching porn because you've been told it's damaging, that pleasure mixed with guilt turns into anxiety. And that anxiety itself can make you believe that porn is causing your erection problems, when really it's the anxiety doing the damage. There's more too. Men often use porn and masturbation to cope after rejection or relationship conflict. But when their partner doesn't understand this and takes it personally, that creates more stress and pressure. That tension also adds to sexual performance problems. So the bigger picture here is very clear. The problem is not porn itself. It's the anxiety, shame, false beliefs, and negative perceptions about porn that mess with your sexual confidence and functioning. At the end of the day, your perception about porn likely has way more impact on your erection than porn itself ever will. The next wrong claim is the idea that porn damages your brain. Now this one, I want to be really honest and accurate with you. The science here is not as simple or one-sided as people often make it sound. In fact, when you really look into the research, the evidence is actually mixed. Some studies suggest certain brain changes in heavy porn users, but others show no evidence of damage at all. So let's break it down carefully. First, let's be clear about what we mean by damage. When people hear that word, they usually imagine brain cells dying, brain lesions, permanent destruction, things like that. But there is no evidence that watching porn causes this kind of brain damage. For example, Bruce Carpenter, a researcher from Brigham Young University, has been very clear about this. He said directly, there is no evidence, not a single study, that shows pornography use causes brain damage or structural brain change. Also, neuroscience shows that the areas activated by porn are actually the same areas that light up when people experience normal pleasures. Things like eating sweet foods or drinking is the reward and desire system. This is normal brain function. Now, because of how porn interacts with that dopamine system, some scientists have drawn parallels between porn and substance abuse. By design, sexual stimulation triggers dopamine release in the brain. Dopamine reinforces reward pathways, which helps form strong memories and habits. That is why when the body desires something like food or sex, it remembers where to seek it again. And this is what happens with porn too. Over time, instead of turning to a romantic partner for sexual connection, a habitual porn user instinctively reaches for a phone or laptop when desire comes up. It becomes a pattern. But, and this is important, that does not mean the brain is damaged. The system is working as designed, forming habits and associations. And like any habit, it can be recalibrated. At the same time, though, some research does show brain differences in heavy porn users. For example, a study from JAMA's Psychiatry 2014 found that men who watch more porn has less gray matter in the right caudate, lower activity in the left putamen during sexual cues, and weaker connectivity between the right caudate and the prefrontal cortex. But even in that study, the authors clearly said something important. They couldn't tell whether those brain differences were caused by watching porn or if they were already there before. In other words, the differences might be pre-existing. So causality was not confirmed. So again, mixed evidence. No brain damage, but some brain differences that may or may not be caused by porn. Nicole Brown, another neuroscientist, also pointed out that pornography does activate the brain's reward circuits, similar to gambling and drugs, but that alone does not mean it's addictive or damaging. Activation of desire pathways happens with many normal activities. What's really important is that these reward pathways are not unique to porn. They are shared with many other everyday pleasures. So porn activates the desire system, but that does not mean it rewires your brain in a destructive way. Also, it's important to talk about touch. Watching porn is visual stimulation, but real erotic touch is processed differently by the body. Porn does not stimulate the C tactile fibers, which are involved in creating the sensation of erotic touch and connection. That's why real human touch feels so different. Porn can trigger arousal and orgasm visually, but it doesn't replace or damage the system involved in touch and intimacy. So what's the bottom line here? There's no clear evidence of brain damage. There are some studies showing brain differences in heavy users, but causality is not confirmed and the interpretation is debated. And yes, porn can create habits in brain's dopamine system, but that system can be recalibrated because it's not broken, it's simply drained. And what's much more clear is that anxiety, shame, and negative beliefs about porn play a far bigger role in creating problems than the porn itself. The next wrong claim is the idea that porn destroys intimacy and ruins relationships. Now this one is also not so simple. People often make it sound like if you watch porn, your relationship will automatically fall apart. But the research on this is mixed. It's not black and white. Let's break it down. First, there is research showing that porn use is connected with some challenges. For example, Elizabeth Morgan's 2011 study found that higher porn use among young adults was linked to lower sexual and relationship satisfaction. It was also associated with having more casual sexual experiences and with stronger preferences for the kinds of sexual acts often shown in porn. So yes, in some cases, more porn use does link with less satisfaction in relationships. But here's where it gets more complicated. Just because porn is part of the picture does not mean it's the root problem. A lot of people assume that when there's porn, that's why the relationship feels disconnected. But research actually suggests we need to look deeper. In many cases, it's not the porn itself, it's the other things going on underneath. It's the lying, it's the hiding, it's the emotional disconnection, it's the lack of communication or effort. Those relationship problems may already be there, and porn just becomes easy to blame. In fact, many biased studies that claim porn threatens marriage don't even compare couples who use porn in healthy ways with couples who don't use it at all. The truth is, there are many couples where one person watches porn individually and yet they still have close, honest, and intimate relationships. So porn is not automatically destructive. It depends heavily on the meaning and context. This was also shown in a study on couples. They found that male porn use was linked to lower sexual quality for both men and women in the relationship. But interestingly, female porn use were linked to higher sexual quality for women. And overall, the meaning people attached to porn, whether they saw it as bad or problematic, explain only a small part of how it affected sexual and relationship quality. And to make it even clear how mixed this really is, look at a study by Staley and Browse in 2013. They found that watching erotic films had both positive and negative effects. On one hand, it increased excitement and even boosted the desire to be close to their partner. On the other hand, it also increased feelings of guilt and anxiety. In other words, it wasn't on good or on bad. It was both at the same time. Some people felt more aroused and connected, while others felt uncomfortable or guilty. So again, it's mixed. Porn can play a role in relationship challenges, but often it's not the direct cause. It's the shame, the secrecy, the disconnection, and the negative meaning people attach to porn that do more damage. And at the end of the day, porn is much more neutral than most people think. It's not as powerful on its own to destroy intimacy. The real issues come from the relationship dynamics and how both people handle communication, connection, and honesty. You see it now, the science, the myths, the mixed evidence, all of it. Porn itself isn't the monster it's been made out to be. The real trap has been shame, fear, and the false stories you've been told. Shame and biased claims told you that you're broken. That's why quitting felt impossible. Not because you're weak, not because porn hijacked your brain forever, but because shame locked you in. And now you know the way out isn't beating yourself up or forcing yourself harder. It's healing, it's dropping the shame so porn loses its grip. Because when you stop quitting from a place of shame and start quitting from a place of self-respect and care, everything changes. Now you quit because you want to use your energy to build something better. You quit because you want honest relationships, not ones built on hiding. You quit because you want to fully experience every emotion in life without numbing. You quit because you know you're capable of more. It feels like stepping back into who you really are. That's the shift, and that's how you truly break free.